You're on.
Good morning, everyone. It's Phil Wade from Dalton Wade Real Estate Group. We're here for our Saturday morning training session, and today we're going to talk about FIRPTA. FIRPTA is the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. But before I get started on that, just wanted to comment on one other quick thing. And that's if you're helping somebody purchase a home, you're acting as buyer's agent. It's a very hot market out there right now, and when you're submitting offers, you need to be aggressive in terms of once that paperwork goes in, you're letting the listing agent know you've sent it. You're pushing them to get a response. I'm starting to see us getting beat out by other agents. Another offer comes in that's better than the offer that we've put forth, or it's taken too long to negotiate it. So when you're in that negotiation stage, you really have nothing until you have a fully executed contract, and you need to be all over it, because if a better offer comes in, which is always possible, because what ends up happening is the listing agent starts calling everybody that had any interest once they get an offer and starts telling them, we have an offer, and if you're going to do anything, you need to do it now. And then lo and behold, something comes in and we get pushed out. So let's not get pushed out. All right, so that's enough on that for right now. So we're back to FIRPTA. FIRPTA, as I said, is the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. What does that mean? What that means is that a foreign buyer has purchased a property and is now listing and selling that property. So the crux, and you can all Google FIRPTA, Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, and learn more. So this is going to be the highlights, but hopefully it's enough to give everybody the information that they need, so that we don't have any issues with it. So if you're representing a seller that does not live in the country, does not have a U.S. passport, is not a U.S. citizen, they are a foreign seller. So what the IRS has decided and done is that if the person, what was happening and why this all came about, it actually came about in 1980 was when the law was passed. It came about because, the house would get sold, the foreign person would collect the money and then, have a gain on that residence, need to pay taxes, but then since they don't live here, they never paid the taxes. So what the IRS came up with was that if the foreign person didn't pay the taxes, they could go back and actually charge and collect the taxes from the buyer. That's right, from the buyer. So what ends up happening if you have a seller, and there is an exemption. There's two exemptions. There's an exemption up to a sales price of $300,000 and an exemption from $300,000 to $1 million, and they're pretty much the same exemption. And what ends up happening, so if the person that's purchasing the home, the buyer, is going to live in the home with complete certainty more than half time for the first 2 years, then there's an exemption that they are exempt from paying that tax, and the seller is also exempt from having that tax withheld. So if you're representing the seller and they're a foreign person, you want to find a buyer that is going to be living in that house more than half time for the first 2 years. And then there's paperwork that the buyer has to sign saying, in essence, that they are relieving the seller of their responsibility for that tax. The seller still has to pay the tax if it's due. It's just what ends up happening is that if the buyer didn't sell that, they would have to have that tax withheld. And that tax now is up to 15%. So the title company withholds the tax, and then the foreign seller fills out, in essence, their tax return with what their gain is, and then they either get a refund or have to pay more back. But this way, some amount has been paid. So if it's more than $1 million, then and you're selling a more than $1 million property and your seller is a foreign person, you have to let them know that 15% of the gross amount of the sale, if over $1 million, is going to be withheld by the title company or put in escrow and then sent to the IRS, and then it's the foreign seller's responsibility to to file their tax return to get that money back if it's due. If it's less than $1 million, so there's 100,000, 0 to 300,000, and then 300,000 to $1 million, and you're representing the seller. You need, when you're signing up the contract, you need the buyer right then to sign the exemption that they're going to be living in the house for that amount of time, 2 years, more than half time. And then if they sign that, the title company, will not withhold the 15% from your seller. And if you're working with the buyer, you want to make sure that they understand all this, that they're more than certainly going to be asked to sign it. Is there any exposure to the buyer because now the seller hasn't paid those taxes of the IRS actually coming back to the buyer? There would be if, in fact, the buyer didn't live there half-time for the first 2 years. There would be some exposure. So they need to be certain that, so in essence, you probably don't want to have an investor buying a house from a foreign person. So that's it on FIRPTA. It's a little bit tricky. If you're working with a foreign seller, you probably want to review the FIRPTA or chat with me and we can kind of go through it together. If you're working with a buyer and they're purchasing a house from a foreign seller, same thing, you need to understand FIRPTA so that when you get to the closing, there's no confusion and everything is smooth. So again, as always, open to any follow-up questions from anybody in terms of helping them with this and understanding this so that we are always giving good service to our clients. So that in essence is today's training on the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, FIRPTA. Thanks for tuning in and have a great weekend.
I don't know how to stop it.